And today is the last day 2020 candidates can file their first quarter fundraising reports. Some of them have already revealed their totals and who's been supporting them. On Sunday, New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand's campaign said it raised $3 million in Q1. Gillibrand's communications director said in a statement the candidate is in a, quote, stronger financial position than many others because she has $10 million in cash on hand. Senator Gillibrand's donations may lag behind some other Democratic 2020 contenders, but it's even farther behind President Trump's. His campaign raised more than $30 million in the first quarter of this year, which is more than Senators Bernie Sanders and Kamala Harris raised combined. And today is the last day 2020 candidates can file their first quarter fundraising reports. Some of them have already revealed their totals and who's been supporting them. On Sunday, New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand's campaign said it raised $3 million in Q1. Gillibrand's communications director said in a statement the candidate is in a, quote, stronger financial position than many others because she has $10 million in cash on hand. Senator Gillibrand's donations may lag behind some other Democratic 2020 contenders, but it's even farther behind President Trump's. His campaign raised more than $30 million in the first quarter of this year, which is more than Senators Bernie Sanders and Kamala Harris raised combined. So let's bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns and Joel Payne. Caitlin is a CBSN political reporter, and Joel is a Democratic strategist. Caitlin and Joel, pleasure having you both with us. So, Caitlin, let me begin with you. We've been following these fundraising totals from the 2020 candidates for a while. So how significant is the president's haul?
Well, it's a significant haul, and it's important to remember that the president's campaign has joined forces officially with the Republican National Committee. So that allows them to raise a lot of money. They're also running, at least at this point in time, unopposed. So they are able to focus on their digital and fundraising efforts while Democrats on the other side are trying to find their own places in this very crowded field. We're seeing some impressive first quarter numbers from some of the Democratic candidates, but because there are so many of them and because Democrats have set a pretty high bar for themselves in terms of fundraising by focusing on grassroots donations, they're also putting some limits on their own capabilities. And I think that's something that we're going to watch as this primary goes forward, whether they're able to sustain a campaign to go toe-to-toe with Trump, who's already building a huge apparatus.
It's only so far that grassroots can go sometimes when you're facing that sort of level of fundraising acumen. So, Joel, what does this mean for the Democrats who are trying to challenge Trump in 2020?
Well, look, I think the story is, in my opinion, and Caitlin might disagree, but I don't think there is a story here. I think people are well funded, generally speaking. I didn't see any numbers that came out that were disqualifying. Some of the lesser candidates are still coming in. I think everyone's slotting into about where you would expect. Probably the number that surprised me the most, the two were Pete Buttigieg at over 7 million and Amy Klobuchar at over 5 million, ahead actually of Cory Booker. Those were the only two numbers that really jumped out at me. Beyond that, I think the field is mostly well-resourced, and I don't think that's going to necessarily be the disqualifying or the determining issue here. I think what the determining issue is going to be is the long game here. Who is able to keep their burn rate under control, which for your viewers who may not understand, that's how much they're spending versus how much they're bringing in.
Right.
How much cash on hand, as Senator Gillibrand alluded to in your setup to the piece. So I think that's what's important, and I think keeping that energy up. That grassroots fundraising is really, that's a thermometer for what the energy is out there in the field. And I think that that's maybe even more important than the bottom line dollars.
So, Joel, you brought up South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who officially entered the 2020 race Sunday. He spoke to a crowd in his hometown, packed into a former Studebaker car plant. Let's listen.
Because there's a myth being sold to industrial and rural communities. The myth that we can stop the clock and turn it back. It comes from people who think the only way to speak to communities like ours is through resentment and nostalgia. They're selling an impossible promise of returning to a bygone era that was never as great as advertised to begin with.
Now, Mayor Pete raised about $7 million, Joel, as you mentioned, in the first quarter. A new national poll from Emerson College finds Buttigieg in third place behind Senator Bernie Sanders and former Vice President Joe Biden, who, of course, has yet to announce his run. It's still very early in the 2020 race. Joel, how hard is it for candidates to keep up momentum this early on?
I think really what it's about is who's going to break out from the pack. And that's what Buttigieg has been able to accomplish here. You know, he was one of the 1%ers, so to speak. He was in that land that you kind of don't want to be in, where you're almost a rounding error in the poll. Now he's a factor, and he's going to be a factor throughout. He's well funded, as we just talked about, and he's got a narrative that really has wings that's going to carry him, you know, into Iowa, into New Hampshire, and I think beyond. I think Pete Buttigieg is at least going to get the Super Tuesday, because what he's going to be able to do now is build the kind of infrastructure for a campaign that he probably did not imagine was possible 3 to 6 months ago. So that's the story here.
Right. Now, Senator Bernie Sanders has been visiting those states that helped deliver the presidency to Donald Trump in 2016. So, you know, Caitlin, what else are Democrats trying to do to show, hey, I can be the one to beat Donald Trump?
Well, beating Donald Trump is something that voters tell us over and over again that they are looking for in a candidate. And so you're seeing all of these campaigns strategize about how to actually do that. So for some, like Elizabeth Warren, it's laying out policy. For others, it's about kind of capturing the imagination, the curiosity, the enthusiasm of voters, seeing that in crowd sizes or fundraising. For others, it's drawing this contrast and saying, look, I'm able to go into these places and gather support, win back these Democrats that we lost in 2016. So that's what you see Bernie Sanders doing with this Midwest tour, trying to make that pitch of electability in areas that Democrats felt very burned by in 2016, having lost that. You also have Democrats wondering whether they can do two things at once: appeal to those voters in the Midwest, but also try to grow the base and energize it, win back voters that didn't show up in 2016. So this is a balancing act. But Democrats are saying, look, we can kind of be everywhere. But O'Rourke is trying to demonstrate that. He's campaigning in North Carolina today. He's going to be in Virginia, elsewhere. Remember, he doesn't have a day job, so he can campaign anywhere. And that certainly is his strategy.
Convenient. It is a very interesting balancing act, as you put it, Caitlin, because it's sort of balancing the more progressive end of the party that seems to have a lot of the energy right now with sort of the more mainstream Democratic voters. And speaking of those, former Vice President Joe Biden is reportedly planning on framing his campaign as an extension of Barack Obama's presidency. Is it clear that that's what many Democrats want out of their 2020 candidate, Joel?
So, you know, this is really, you know, Biden, now that he's kind of gotten past that bump that we all experienced together over the last month or so with touchy-feely gate, now we've emerged to the point where the Biden campaign is actually going to come together. And, you know, he's been using some really interesting language, and Caitlin, I'm sure your reporting reflects this as well, talking about the new left, talking about really, you know, putting that Obama-Biden coalition back together. And this is an interesting, tact that the former vice president is taking, because what he's really kind of trying to do is turn back the clock a little bit. That's generally not what you see as successful in these kind of campaigns. One thing that I've taken from the last few cycles, working for John Edwards, seeing the 2008 and 2012 cycles, and then seeing 2016, where Hillary Clinton was the candidate of static energy and Donald Trump was the candidate of change. Go with change. When you have a fork in the road, you have static versus change. Go with change. Biden is betting on static, stable, I'll restore, I'll bring us back to where we want to be. It'll be interesting to see if voters respond the way that he wants him to. But he is certainly kind of zigging where others in the field are zagging.
Joel makes an interesting point about change versus stasis. Do you agree with that, Caitlin?
Well, look at Pete Buttigieg's campaign pitch over the weekend, calling for generational change, calling for something new.
Right.
That's certainly what he feels will identify him from the field, and we'll see what voters actually think. Obama is still very popular among Democratic voters, no question about it. The question is, what do they want in a candidate, and how difficult it really is to replicate what Obama was able to do. That's going to be a challenge.
Absolutely. Caitlin Huey-Burns and Joel Payne, thanks to both of you. We really appreciate it.